The merchant's lip curled as he examined the silver ring, turning it over in his grimy fingers like it was worthless tin rather than 3 generations of Blackwood legacy. Vera kept her hands pressed flat against her thighs, hiding the tremor that hadn't stopped since she'd woken shivering in the abandoned barn that morning. 6 weeks of running, 6 weeks of sleeping in ditches and hollow trees, of eating whatever scraps she could scavenge, of watching her body change with a pregnancy she couldn't afford to acknowledge. Blackwood Crest, the merchant said, loud enough for the gathering crowd to hear. His eyes flicked to her swollen belly, barely concealed beneath her threadbare cloak. "You're that one, aren't you? The thief. The rogue better." Heat flooded Vera's cheeks, but she held his gaze. "The ring is solid silver. Worth at least. Worth nothing from hands like yours." He tossed it back at her, and she fumbled to catch it, her reflexes dulled by hunger. "Get out of my stall before you bring your curse down on my goods." A woman nearby pulled her child closer, whispering something that made the little girl stare at Vera with wide, frightened eyes. Monster, that look said. Shame. Vera had seen it in every town, every village, every crossroads market she'd dared to enter since Nikolai had driven her from the only home she'd ever known. He planned this. The thought circled endlessly in her exhausted mind. He planned every piece of it. She remembered his face when he'd stood before their father's council, his expression a perfect mask of grief as he'd laid out his evidence. Ledgers showing funds diverted to rogue accounts. Witness testimony from wolves she'd never met claiming she'd been seen leaving their camps at dawn. Letters, forged, every one of them, bearing her signature and promising information in exchange for coin. "You can't believe this," she'd said, looking at her father. Alpha Blackwood had sat in his carved wooden throne, his face gray, his hands trembling with the illness that had been stealing him from her for months. "Father, please. I would never—" "The evidence speaks." Her father's voice had cracked. "I don't want to believe it, Vera, but I can't ignore what's in front of me." Nikolai had stepped forward then, playing the reluctant accuser, the brother forced to reveal his sister's sins. "There's more," he'd said softly. "She's pregnant, Father. By one of them. One of the rogues." The gasp that had rippled through the council chamber still echoed in her ears. Her hand had gone instinctively to her belly, 3 months along, barely showing, a secret she'd kept while she grieved the man who'd given her this child. Thomas, her first love, her promised mate, killed in a border skirmish 2 weeks after they'd discovered the pregnancy. She'd been waiting for the mourning period to end before she told anyone. Nikolai had taken that grief and twisted it into a weapon. "Exile," her father had pronounced, each word landing like a physical blow. "You will leave Blackwood territory by nightfall. You will not return. Your name is struck from the records." She hadn't begged. Some fragment of pride had kept her spine straight as guards escorted her to the boundary stones, as packmates she'd known her whole life turned their backs, as her own mother watched from a window without lifting a hand to intervene. But she'd felt something essential crack inside her. Some foundation she hadn't known she was standing on crumbling away beneath her feet. Now, in this hostile market with hunger gnawing at her belly and her mother's ring clutched uselessly in her palm, Vera wondered if she'd made it this far, only to die within sight of bread and shelter. "Please." The word scraped out of her throat before she could stop it. She hated the sound of it. Weak, desperate, everything she'd sworn she wouldn't become. "I just need food. Anything. I can work." "We don't need rogue lovers working near decent folk." The merchant spat at her feet. "Be gone, or I'll call the town guard." Vera stepped backward, nearly tripping over a loose cobblestone. Her vision swam. When had she last eaten? Yesterday morning, perhaps. A handful of winter berries that had left her stomach cramping. The baby needed more than she could give it. The baby needed— "That's enough." The voice cut through the market noise like a blade, deep and resonant with an authority that made Vera's exhausted wolf lift its head for the first time in days. She turned. He stood at the edge of the crowd, tall and broad-shouldered beneath a traveling cloak that couldn't quite disguise the lethal grace of his movements. His hood shadowed his face, but she could feel the weight of his attention like a physical pressure against her skin. The lady asked for a fair trade. He stepped forward, and wolves who had been edging toward Vera suddenly retreated. I suggest you reconsider your refusal. The merchant's face went pale. I don't want trouble. Then don't create it. The stranger reached into his cloak and withdrew a coin purse, tossing it onto the merchant's table. Food, warm clothing, whatever else she needs. Keep the change and your tongue behind your teeth. Vera's instinct screamed at her to run, to refuse charity from a male whose power radiated off him in waves she could taste at the back of her throat. But her legs wouldn't move. Her wolf, dormant and defeated, had begun to stir with an urgency she didn't understand. The stranger turned toward her. Their eyes met. Heat exploded through Vera's chest like wildfire catching dry timber. Searing, consuming, impossible to contain. Her wolf didn't just stir. It surged against her skin with a desperate, keening whine that she felt in her very bones. Every nerve ending in her body came alive, attuned to him, reaching for him, recognizing something her mind refused to accept. His hood fell back as he inhaled sharply, revealing a face carved from shadows and authority. Sharp cheekbones, a jaw darkened with stubble, and eyes that shifted from storm gray to burning gold in the space of a heartbeat. She knew that face. Every wolf in the realm knew that face. Alpha King Marcus Ashford. His lips parted, and a growl rumbled from his chest, low and possessive and utterly undeniable. Mate. The word shattered something inside her. Her hand flew to her belly, to the child growing there. Another man's child. A dead man's child. And she saw his eyes track the movement. Saw understanding and something far more complex flicker across his features. She stood before the most powerful alpha alive, her body thrumming with a bond she'd never expected, never wanted, couldn't possibly deserve. She was pregnant. She was disgraced. She was everything his kingdom would reject. No, she whispered. That's not... I can't... But her wolf knew the truth, and her wolf had already chosen. The word hung in the frozen air between them, reshaping everything Vera thought she knew about her future. Mate. Her wolf pressed against her skin, straining toward him with an intensity that bordered on pain, and she couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything but stand there with her hand pressed protectively over her belly while the most powerful alpha in the realm stared at her like she was the answer to a question he'd stopped asking. You're mistaken. Her voice came out thin, reedy. The bond, it doesn't work like this. I can't be... Marcus Ashford took a single step forward, and her entire body responded. Warmth flooded through her veins, pooling low in her chest where the mate bond had already begun to root itself. She could feel it growing, spreading tendrils through her exhausted flesh, demanding acknowledgement. Her wolf whined again, the sound desperate and wanting, and Vera hated herself for the weakness of it. You feel it. It wasn't a question. His golden eyes held hers, unblinking, and she saw his nostrils flare as he drew in her scent. Whatever he found there made his jaw tighten. You're starving, exhausted, and you're... His gaze dropped to her belly again, and something shifted in his expression. Not disgust, as she'd expected. Not rejection. Something far more complicated moved behind those predators' eyes. Pregnant, she finished flatly, with another wolf's child. A dead wolf's child. So whatever you think you're sensing, I know what I'm sensing. He cut her off, his voice dropping to a low rumble that vibrated through her bones. I've waited 32 years for this. I know exactly what you are. The crowd around them had gone utterly silent. Vera became aware of dozens of eyes fixed on her, on the Alpha King, on the impossible scene unfolding in this dusty border market. She saw the merchant who'd spat at her feet now pressing himself against his own stall, trembling. She saw mothers pulling children back, wolves lowering their gazes in instinctive submission to the power radiating off Marcus Ashford in waves. And she saw the speculation beginning. The whispers that would spread like wildfire through the borderlands and beyond. The disgraced Blackwood heir. The rogue better, claiming to be mate to the king. Don't. She stumbled backward, her hip catching painfully on a cartwheel. Whatever you're about to do, don't. I'm not what you want. I'm not what anyone wants. And I won't. Her vision blurred with exhaustion and unshed tears. I won't let you use me to legitimize some political alliance or humiliate my family or whatever this is really about. Marcus went very still. The gold in his eyes flickered, storm gray bleeding back in, and when he spoke, his voice had lost its edge of command. You think I would do that? I think powerful alphas do whatever serves their purposes. Vera's hand tightened on her mother's ring, the silver edges biting into her palm. I think I've been used enough. I think... Her knees buckled. She didn't feel herself fall, but suddenly strong arms were catching her, and she was pressed against a chest that radiated heat like a furnace, and her wolf was purring, actually purring, at the contact, while her human mind screamed warning she was too weak to heed. Enough. Marcus's voice was in her ear, low and fierce. We're leaving. Now. I don't... You're coming with me. He shifted her weight easily as if she weighed nothing, and she felt the rumble of his growl against her cheek. You can argue with me after you've eaten, after you've slept, after you're not half dead on your feet. His arms tightened around her. But you're coming with me, mate. That's not negotiable. The word sent another surge of impossible warmth through her chest. Vera wanted to fight, wanted to push him away and run until she couldn't run anymore, but her body had already surrendered. Her wolf had already surrendered, and some treacherous part of her heart, the part that remembered what it felt like to belong somewhere, to be wanted by someone, that part had surrendered too. She let her head fall against his shoulder and let the darkness take her. When Vera woke, she was lying on something soft. That was wrong. She'd trained herself to wake instantly at the slightest sound, to bolt upright and run before whatever danger had found her could strike. But her body refused to cooperate. She felt heavy, warm, wrapped in layers of fur and wool that held the lingering scent of pine and something deeper, muskier, that made her wolf stir with contentment. His scent. The realization crashed through her and she jerked upright, her heart hammering. She was in a tent, a proper military command tent, she realized, taking in the sturdy canvas walls, the wooden camp furniture, the maps spread across a table in the corner. A small brazier burned near the entrance, filling the space with gentle warmth. And she was alone. Vera's hand went immediately to her belly. Still there, still safe. She could feel the tiny flutter of life beneath her palm, and relief nearly crushed her. Then she noticed the food. A wooden tray sat on a low table beside her pallet, loaded with more sustenance than she'd seen in weeks. Bread, still steaming. A bowl of thick stew that made her mouth water painfully. Dried fruit. A flask of what smelled like honeyed milk. And beside it, a note written in bold, angular script. Eat everything. Sleep as long as you need. I'll be outside. Vera stared at the note for a long moment, her exhausted mind struggling to process what it meant. He'd left her alone. He'd provided food without expecting anything in return. He wasn't here, hovering, demanding, using her weakness against her the way Nikolai had used every vulnerability she'd ever shown. Her hands shook as she reached for the bread. She tried to eat slowly. She'd learned the hard way that a starving stomach couldn't handle too much too fast, but the first bite of warm bread nearly undid her. She shoved another piece into her mouth, then another, tears streaming down her face as her body finally received what it had been screaming for. The stew was rich and hot, seasoned with herbs that tasted like home, and she scraped the bowl clean before she even realized what she was doing. By the time she'd finished, her stomach was uncomfortably full, and her eyelids were dragging downward again. She should stay awake. She should find out where she was, what Marcus wanted, how to escape before this trap snapped shut around her. She should. The tent flap rustled, and she froze. Marcus Ashford ducked through the entrance, then stopped short when he saw her awake. For a long moment, neither of them moved. He looked different without the crowd around them, younger somehow, though the shadows under his eyes spoke of sleepless nights and burdens she couldn't imagine. He'd removed his traveling cloak, revealing broad shoulders wrapped in simple dark clothing. Nothing that proclaimed his status except the raw authority he wore like a second skin. "You're awake." He stayed near the entrance, making no move to approach her. "Good. You needed the rest." "Where am I?" Her voice came out hoarse. "My war camp, about 3 miles from the market." He gestured toward the tent flap. "We're in Ashford territory now. You're safe here." Safe. The word felt foreign on her tongue. She couldn't remember the last time she'd felt truly safe. Why? The question tore out of her before she could stop it. Why any of this? The food, the shelter, bringing me here. She gestured helplessly at the warm tent, the empty tray. "You don't know me. You don't know what I've done, what I've been accused of." "I know what Nikolai Blackwood accused you of." Marcus's expression hardened. "I also know Nikolai Blackwood. The kind of wolf he is. The kind of ambition he carries." He took a single step forward, then seemed to catch himself, deliberately maintaining distance. "I don't believe a word of what he's spread about you." Vera's breath caught. "You don't. I watched you in that market." His voice softened, though his eyes remained intent on hers. "I watched you starving, desperate, alone, and still too proud to beg properly. I watched you protect your belly before anything else, even when you were falling." Something raw flickered across his features. "I know innocence when I see it. And I know what Nikolai did to you was calculated, not deserved." The tears she'd been fighting since she woke finally spilled over. Vera pressed her palm against her mouth, trying to contain the sob building in her chest, and turned her face away. She couldn't let him see her like this. Couldn't let him know how much those words meant. To be believed, finally, after weeks of being treated like a criminal. She heard him move, and her body tensed. But when she dared to look, he'd knelt several feet away from her pallet, lowering himself to her level rather than looming over her. The gesture was so unexpected, so deliberately non-threatening, that it cracked something in her chest. "I won't touch you," he said quietly. "Not until you want me to." "The bond," he exhaled roughly. "The bond is screaming at me to hold you, to mark you, to make sure no one ever hurts you again. But you're not ready for that. And I won't be another wolf who takes from you without asking." Vera stared at him. In all her imaginings of what the Alpha King might be like, the stories of his ruthlessness, his power, his conquests on the battlefield, she had never imagined this. This careful restraint, this patience. "The baby," she whispered. Doesn't it bother you?" Something softened in his gaze. "The child is part of you. How could that ever bother me? It's not yours." "It could be." He held her stare, steady and certain. "If you let me. If you choose to stay. That child could be mine in every way that matters." His voice dropped. "I would raise it as my own heir, Vera. I would love it. Because it's yours. The wolf who fathered it." He paused. "You loved him." It wasn't a question, but she answered anyway. "Yes. His name was Thomas. He died before he could know about. She pressed her hand to her belly. He was good. He would have been a good father. Then I'll honor his memory. Marcus held out his hands, palms up, showing her they were empty, showing her she had nothing to fear from him. But I'm asking you to let me try, to let me show you what this bond could be. Not a trap, not a political tool. His voice roughened. A partnership. A home. Before she could respond, voices erupted outside the tent. Don't care about protocol. I need to speak with the king immediately. His Majesty gave orders not to be disturbed. This is urgent. Marcus was on his feet instantly, the tender vulnerability vanishing behind a mask of cold authority. He moved toward the tent flap just as it burst open, revealing a wolf in military dress, his face flushed with agitation. My king, forgive me, but the War Council is demanding an audience. Word has spread that you've brought a... The wolf's eyes found Vera, and his lip curled with barely concealed disgust. A rogue female into the camp. A pregnant one. The council is questioning your judgment. Vera felt herself shrink back against the furs, old shame rising in her throat like bile. Here it was. The rejection she'd been waiting for. Even the Alpha King's power couldn't shield her from what she was, what everyone believed her to be. But Marcus didn't waver. He turned slowly to face the messenger, and even from across the tent, Vera could see the dangerous gold bleeding into his irises. The council is questioning me? His voice was soft, deadly quiet. The messenger paled. They mean no disrespect, my king. They simply wish to understand. Tell them this. Marcus stepped forward, and the messenger stumbled back. The female in this tent is under my protection. She is not a rogue. She is not disgraced. She is my mate. The word cracked through the air like thunder. And the next wolf who speaks against her, whether in counsel or in whispers, answers to my teeth. The messenger's face went white. Your mate? My king? Did I stutter? Marcus's growl reverberated through the tent, and Vera felt it vibrate in her chest, her wolf responding with a surge of something terrifying and exhilarating. Spread the word. Let every wolf in this camp know exactly what she is. And summon Garrett. He'll serve as her personal guard. Personal? The messenger swallowed hard. Garrett is your most trusted warrior, my king. To assign him as guard to my mate. Marcus's eyes were fully gold now, his wolf staring out with predatory focus. Finish that sentence, and I'll finish you. The messenger fled. In the ringing silence that followed, Vera found she couldn't speak, couldn't move. She sat frozen on the pallet, her heart pounding, watching this powerful alpha who had just defended her, threatened violence for her, without hesitation, without doubt. Marcus turned back to her, and the gold slowly faded from his gaze, leaving something softer underneath. Something almost vulnerable. I told you, he said quietly. You're safe here. He moved toward the tent flap, then paused, looking back over his shoulder. Get some rest. When you're ready, we'll talk more. But know this. Vera Blackwood. His voice dropped to a rough murmur. Whatever happens next, whatever comes for us, you're not facing it alone. Not anymore. He ducked through the flap and was gone. Vera sat motionless for a long time after he left, her hand pressed over her racing heart. The mate bond pulsed warm and steady in her chest. No longer a terrifying intrusion, but something that felt almost like hope. She thought of his eyes when he'd looked at her belly. She thought of his hands, held out and empty. She thought of the way he'd knelt to her level. This king, this alpha, making himself small so she wouldn't feel afraid. A wall she hadn't known she'd built began to crumble at its edges. For the first time in 6 weeks, Vera closed her eyes without fear. Vera woke to voices. Not the urgent shouts that had interrupted Marcus the night before, but something worse. Low murmurs, carefully controlled, the kind of conversation people had when they didn't want to be overheard. She lay still on the pallet, her eyes barely open, her breath shallow and even. Weeks of running had taught her the value of pretending to sleep. Arrived an hour ago, claims he's here on behalf of the Blackwood Pack. The voice was unfamiliar, gruff with age. Says his sister is mentally unstable, that the pregnancy has made her confused. Vera's blood turned to ice. Nikolai. He's requesting an audience with the king. Another voice, younger, uncertain. Says he wants to bring her home peacefully, that their father is dying and wants to see her before the end. A harsh laugh. Peacefully, right. And I'm sure the armed wolves he brought with him are just for show. Vera's hand moved instinctively to her belly, pressing against the small swell where her child grew. Her heart hammered so loudly she was certain they would hear it, certain they would know she was awake and listening and terrified. Nikolai was here. He had found her. The tent flap rustled, and she squeezed her eyes shut, forcing her breathing to remain steady. Footsteps approached. Heavy, deliberate, stopping a few feet from her pallet. She's still sleeping. The gruff voice again, closer now. Poor thing looks half dead. Whatever happened to her out there? The king gave orders. No one disturbs her. I know what the king ordered, but you heard what her brother said. If she really is unstable, then it's not our place to decide. The younger voice hardened. Marcus claimed her as his mate. That makes her our Luna. Whether the council likes it or not, we protect her. That's the job. A long pause. Then the gruff voice sighed. You're right. It's just something about that Blackwood male. The way he smiled when he talked about bringing her home didn't sit right with me. They moved away, their voices fading as they exited the tent. Vera opened her eyes. For a long moment she simply stared at the canvas ceiling, her mind racing. Nikolai had tracked her across the borderlands. He had followed her trail to the Alpha King's camp. And now he was here, spinning his lies, wearing his concerned brother mask for anyone foolish enough to believe it. Her wolf stirred, not with the confused longing she'd felt when Marcus was near, but with something older and colder. Warning. Nikolai wanted her dead. She had known it from the moment he'd stood before their father's council and presented those forged ledgers, his voice dripping with false regret as he exposed her crimes. She had seen it in his eyes when their father pronounced her exile, a flicker of triumph, quickly hidden. He had planned it all, the accusations, the timing, the public revelation of her pregnancy, designed to humiliate her so thoroughly that no pack would offer her sanctuary, and now he was here to finish what he'd started. Vera pushed herself upright, ignoring the wave of dizziness that washed over her. She had to find Marcus, had to warn him about what Nikolai truly was before her brother's poison spread any further. The tent flap opened. Vera's breath caught. But it wasn't Nikolai who ducked through the entrance. It was a massive warrior with copper skin and silver-streaked hair, his face carved from stone, his eyes assessing her with the cool efficiency of a predator evaluating prey. You're awake. His voice was a low rumble. Good, I'm Garrett. Marcus's most trusted warrior, the guard he'd assigned to protect her. I heard. Vera's voice cracked, her throat still raw from weeks of disuse. She swallowed and tried again. I heard my brother arrived. Something shifted in Garrett's expression. Not pity. This male didn't seem capable of pity, but understanding. Word travels fast in war camps. Yes, Nikolai Blackwood is here. He requested an audience with the king an hour ago. You can't let Marcus meet with him alone. Vera struggled to her feet, her legs unsteady. Nikolai is dangerous. He'll lie, he'll twist everything, The king isn't meeting with him alone. Garrett's voice was steady, almost gentle. He's meeting with him in full council, with 6 of his best warriors present. And he asked me to bring you. Vera froze. Bring me? His exact words were, "My mate deserves to face her accuser." Garrett's stone face cracked slightly, the barest hint of approval. "The king doesn't believe your brother's version of events. Neither do I." "You don't even know me." "I know liars." Garrett moved toward her, and despite his size, his movements were careful, non-threatening. "I've served Marcus for 15 years. I've watched him judge men with golden words and hollow hearts. Your brother speaks too smoothly. His eyes don't match his smile." He paused. "And you have the look of a wolf who's been hunted, not one who's running from her crimes." Vera stared at him, something cracking in her chest. She had expected suspicion, hostility, the same contempt she'd faced at every turn since her exile. Instead, this warrior, this stranger, was offering something that felt dangerously close to belief. "I didn't steal anything," she whispered. "I didn't betray my pack. Nikolai forged the evidence. All of it." "Then tell the king." Garrett held out a bundle of fabric, clean clothes, simple but well made. "Tell him the truth. Let him see your brother for what he is." Vera took the clothes with trembling hands. "And if they don't believe me? If Nikolai's lies are too convincing?" Garrett's expression hardened. "Then I'll believe you anyway, and I'll make sure you're safe, regardless." He turned and stepped outside the tent, giving her privacy to change. Vera dressed quickly, her fingers clumsy with fear and exhaustion. The clothes were soft against her skin, a simple dress in deep forest green, loose enough to accommodate her growing belly. Someone had thought of that. Someone had considered her comfort. When she emerged from the tent, the morning light made her wince. The camp sprawled before her, hundreds of tents arranged in precise rows, wolves moving between them with military efficiency. Cooking fires sent smoke spiraling toward the gray sky. The air smelled of pine and horses and something else. Something wilder. Power. The scent of an Alpha King's territory. Garrett led her through the camp, and Vera felt the weight of 100 stairs pressing against her skin. Whispers followed in her wake. "That's her. The pregnant one. Did you hear what her brother said?" But no one approached. No one challenged her. Garrett's presence, she realized, was a statement. The king's most trusted warrior, walking beside her like an honor guard. A silent declaration that whatever her brother claimed, she mattered to the crown. The command tent loomed ahead, larger than the others, its canvas adorned with the Ashford crest, a silver wolf against a crimson field. 2 warriors flanked the entrance, their eyes flicking to Vera before returning forward. They didn't move to stop her. Garrett paused at the entrance. "Are you ready?" Vera thought of Nikolai's smooth voice, his practiced lies, the way he had stolen everything from her with a smile. She thought of Tomas, dead in the borderlands, never knowing about the child they'd made together. She thought of her father, dying, believing the worst of her. She thought of Marcus, kneeling to her level, his golden eyes full of impossible tenderness. "No," she said honestly, "but I'm going in anyway." The tent flap opened. The interior was larger than she'd expected, dominated by a massive table covered in maps and documents. A dozen wolves stood around it, council members by the look of them, their faces a mix of curiosity and suspicion. And at the head of the table, Marcus. He looked different in the morning light, more formal, a king rather than a traveler. His dark hair was swept back from his face, and he wore a fitted jacket that emphasized the breadth of his shoulders. But his eyes, those storm-gray eyes, found hers immediately, and Vera felt the mate bond flare in her chest like a banked fire catching flame. Vera. Her name on his lips was a caress. "Come." She moved toward him, aware of every gaze tracking her progress. He stood as she approached, abandoning his position of power to meet her halfway, a gesture that made several council members exchange startled looks. "How do you feel?" His voice was low, meant only for her. "Terrified," she admitted. Something flickered in his gaze, not pity, but understanding. "Good. Fear keeps you sharp. But remember," he leaned closer, his breath warm against her ear. "You're not alone anymore. Whatever he says, whatever he claims, I'm with you. I need you to believe that." Before she could respond, a familiar voice cut through the tent. "Sister." Vera turned. Nikolai stood near the entrance, flanked by two Blackwood wolves she recognized from her father's guard. He looked exactly as she remembered. Tall and handsome, his dark hair perfectly styled, his amber eyes warm with false concern. His smile was the practiced expression of a worried brother, but Vera knew what lurked beneath that mask. "Thank the moon, you're alive." Nikolai moved toward her, arms outstretched. "I've been searching everywhere. When you disappeared after the exile, I thought—" "Stay back." The words came out sharper than she intended. Nikolai stopped, his smile faltering. "Vera, it's me, your brother. I'm here to help you." "You're here to finish what you started." Vera's voice trembled, but she held her ground. "Don't pretend otherwise." Silence fell over the tent. The council members shifted uneasily, their gazes darting between Vera and Nikolai. Marcus stood motionless at her side, a solid wall of heat and power. Nikolai's expression shifted, hurt flickering across his features. "I don't understand." "Vera, whatever you think I've done, you forged the ledgers." The words poured out of her, weeks of silence finally breaking. "You created false witnesses. You wrote those letters with my handwriting. I don't know how, but you did. You stood before Father's council and lied, and you destroyed everything I had." "Vera, you revealed my pregnancy publicly." Her voice cracked. "You humiliated me. You made sure no pack would take me in. You wanted me to die out there, alone in the snow, and you would have inherited everything." The tent was deathly quiet. Nikolai's mask didn't slip. He was too good for that. But something cold flickered in his amber eyes. Something that reminded Vera why she'd never fully trusted him, even as children. "My sister is clearly unwell." He turned to the council, spreading his hands in a gesture of helpless concern. "The pregnancy, the stress of exile, it's affected her mind. She's making accusations she can't possibly support. I came here to bring her home, to get her the help she needs." "The help she needs?" Marcus's voice was soft, dangerous. "And what help would that be, exactly?" Nikolai hesitated, seeming to sense the trap but unable to see it clearly. "Medical attention, family support. Our father is dying, Alpha King. He wants to see his daughter before the end. Whatever misunderstandings have occurred, surely we can resolve them peacefully." "Peacefully?" Marcus stepped forward, and Vera watched Nikolai resist the urge to retreat. "Tell me, Lord Blackwood, if your intentions are peaceful, why did you bring 6 armed warriors to my camp? Why did your wolves spend the morning spreading rumors about my mate's mental state? And why?" His voice dropped to a growl. "Did one of your men approach my healers asking about herbs that could ease a troubled pregnancy?" Vera's blood ran cold. Herbs that could ease a pregnancy. He was trying to kill her baby. "I don't know what you mean." Nikolai's voice remained steady, but his eyes had gone flat. "My men were simply concerned. Get out." Marcus's words cracked like thunder. "Take your wolves and leave my territory. If I see any Blackwood face within 100 miles of this camp by nightfall, I'll consider it an act of war." Nikolai's mask finally shattered. For a single instant, Vera saw her brother clearly, the cold calculation behind his eyes, the rage twisting his handsome features, the predator she had always sensed but never wanted to acknowledge. Then the mask slid back into place. "This isn't over," Nikolai said softly. "My sister belongs with her family. Whatever delusions she's fed you about mates and destiny, eventually you'll see the truth. And when you do, his smile returned, sharp as a blade. I'll be waiting. He turned and walked out of the tent, his wolves following in his wake. The silence stretched. Then Marcus's arm came around Vera's shoulders, pulling her close, and she realized she was shaking, trembling like a leaf in a winter storm, her breath coming in short gasps, her wolf howling with fear and rage. Breathe. Marcus's voice was steady, calm. He's gone. You're safe. He tried to. She couldn't finish. The words tangled in her throat, choking her. I know. His hand moved to rest against her belly, gentle and protective. He won't touch you. He won't touch this child. I swear it on my life. Around them, the council stood in stunned silence. Whatever doubts they'd harbored about the Alpha King's strange mate seemed to have evaporated in the face of Nikolai's barely concealed threats. But Vera barely noticed. All she could think about was the cold calculation in her brother's eyes. He wasn't done. He would never be done. And somewhere out there in the gathering dark, he was already planning his next move. The attack came 3 nights later. Vera had begun to believe, foolishly perhaps, that Nikolai had retreated, that Marcus's warning had been enough, that for once, her brother's calculated patience had failed him. She was walking in the palace gardens when the first shadow moved. Marcus had brought her to the Ashford stronghold 2 days prior, installing her in chambers adjacent to his own. The palace was ancient stone and climbing roses, a fortress softened by generations of care. She'd spent hours exploring its winding paths, her wolf gradually settling into something that felt dangerously close to belonging. The gardens were her favorite, moonlit paths lined with night-blooming jasmine, the scent almost overwhelming enough to mask. Almost. Her wolf surged against her skin in sudden alarm, and Vera spun just as 3 figures emerged from the hedgerow. Dark clothing, covered faces, the glint of silver blades that made her stomach lurch with recognition. Wolfsbane-coated steel. 1 cut would be enough. The brother sends his regards, the lead assassin said, his voice rough with amusement. He wanted you to know. This isn't personal. Just business. Vera's back hit a garden wall. Nowhere to run. Garrett was on the other side of the palace, and Marcus was in a late council session, and she was alone with 3 wolves who had been paid to end her life. Her hand went to her belly, to the child she'd fought so hard to protect. Not like this, she thought. I won't die like this. Something stirred in her chest. Not her wolf. Something deeper. Something that had slumbered in her blood for generations, waiting for a moment of desperate need. She remembered her grandmother's stories, the old Blackwood gift, passed through the female line, the ability to show truth through touch, to force others to see what they refused to acknowledge. Bloodline memories, her grandmother had called it. The truth that lives in our veins. Vera had never been able to access it, had assumed it had skipped her entirely. But now, with death closing in and her child's life hanging in the balance, she felt it wake. The lead assassin lunged. Vera didn't think. She grabbed his wrist with both hands and pushed. Light exploded behind her eyes. She felt her consciousness expand, reaching into the assassin's mind, dragging truth to the surface with claws made of pure will. She showed him Nikolai's study, the forged ledgers, the carefully practiced lies. She showed him her brother counting coins and laughing about how easy it had been. She showed him the order. Kill her before she can expose me. Kill her before the child is born, written in Nikolai's own hand. The assassin screamed. He wrenched away from her, staggering backward, his face pale with horror. Moon above, he gasped. It's true, it's all true. He told us you were a traitor. He told us... He lied. Vera's voice came out strange, resonant, like something older was speaking through her. He's been lying all along. The other two assassins hesitated, looking between their leader and Vera with growing uncertainty. "We were paid to kill an innocent woman," the lead assassin said hoarsely. "Paid to murder a pregnant female who committed no crime." He turned to his companions. "I won't do it. Whatever he offered us, it's not worth this." "She's doing something to you," one of the others hissed. "Some kind of magic." "It's not magic. It's memory. Her bloodline carries truth." The lead assassin pulled off his mask, revealing a scarred face and eyes that had seen too much. "I've heard stories. The old Blackwood gift. I never believed them until now." Vera swayed, the effort of what she'd done catching up to her. But she wasn't finished. Couldn't be finished. Nikolai was still out there. Still plotting. Still dangerous. "Take me to the Great Hall," she said. "I need to show everyone what you just saw." The scarred assassin, her unexpected ally, nodded slowly. "Your brother is there now. He arrived an hour ago with evidence of your crimes. The council is hearing his case." Of course he was. While she'd been walking in gardens, Nikolai had been positioning his final move. Then let's not keep him waiting. The walk to the Great Hall felt endless. Vera's legs trembled with exhaustion, and the child in her belly kicked restlessly, as if sensing her agitation. But she didn't stop. Couldn't stop. Nikolai had taken everything from her once. He would not do so again. The doors to the Great Hall were massive oak, carved with the Ashford wolf. They opened at her touch. Silence crashed through the chamber. Nikolai stood at the center of the room, surrounded by council members. Documents were spread across the table before him. More forgeries, she knew without looking. More carefully constructed lies. Marcus stood near his throne, his face unreadable, but his eyes found hers immediately. She felt his shock through the bond, his fear, his desperate, overwhelming relief at seeing her alive. "Vera." Nikolai's voice was smooth, concerned, utterly false. "Sister, you shouldn't be up. You look unwell. Perhaps you should rest while the adults discuss." "I'm done resting." She walked toward him, each step deliberate. "I'm done running. I'm done being afraid of you." His mask flickered. Just for an instant, but she saw the predator beneath. "I don't know what you mean. I've only ever wanted to help." "You wanted me dead." She was close enough now, close enough to touch. "You forged evidence. You created false witnesses. You had assassins waiting in the garden tonight to cut my throat with wolfsbane blades." Gasps rippled through the assembly. Council members shifted uneasily. "Delusions," Nikolai said, spreading his hands. "The stress of pregnancy, combined with her guilt." Vera grabbed his face with both hands, and she pushed with everything she had. The Great Hall erupted in chaos as truth poured through her, flooding the bond she'd created with her touch, spilling out into the minds of every wolf present. They saw what she saw. They felt what she felt. The stolen funds, the forged ledgers, her brother's cold voice saying she has to die before the child is born. His satisfaction as he'd watched their father pronounce exile on his own daughter. Nikolai screamed, trying to wrench away, but Vera held on with desperate strength. She showed them everything. The calculated destruction of her life. The murder attempts. The plan to claim the Blackwood Alpha position through treachery. When she finally released him, she was shaking. The room was silent. Nikolai stumbled backward, his handsome face contorted with rage. "You worthless bitch!" All pretense had vanished. His amber eyes blazed with hatred. "You were supposed to die in the snow. You were supposed to be nothing but a cautionary tale. I survived." Vera's voice was steady. "Your lies didn't." Marcus stepped forward, and the temperature in the room dropped. His eyes burned gold, and when he spoke, his voice held the weight of absolute authority. "Nikolai Wildfire, you are guilty of treason, attempted murder of my mate, and crimes against your blood." The words fell like hammer blows. The sentence is death. Nikolai's face twisted. You can't. She's nothing. She's a disgraced exile who spread her legs for rogues and… He lunged. Whether toward Vera or Marcus, she couldn't tell. It didn't matter. Marcus moved faster than her eyes could track, catching Nikolai by the throat with one massive hand. His claws extended, razor sharp, pressing against her brother's windpipe. You should have let her live in peace, Marcus said, his voice barely recognizable. This wasn't the gentle man who had knelt to her level, who had brought her food with his own hands. This was the Alpha King. This was death given form. Nikolai's eyes went wide with sudden terror. Wait, you can't. I'm an Alpha heir. There will be consequences. The only consequence, Marcus growled, is yours. His claws tore through. Nikolai crumpled to the floor. Blood pooled beneath him, spreading across the ancient stones. He made one small sound, more whimper than anything, and then went still. Vera stared at her brother's body. She expected to feel something. Grief, perhaps, or horror. But all she felt was exhaustion. And beneath that, spreading slowly through her chest, relief so profound it made her knees buckle. Marcus caught her before she could fall. I've got you, he murmured against her hair. It's over. He can't hurt you anymore. She buried her face in his chest and finally let herself cry. The council dispersed shortly after, murmuring amongst themselves as servants dealt with the body. Garrett appeared, taking charge of the remaining Blackwood wolves who had accompanied Nikolai, ensuring they were contained and questioned. The scarred assassin, whose name, Vera learned, was Corvin, had already begun telling anyone who would listen about what he'd witnessed in her memories. But Vera barely noticed any of it. Marcus carried her to his chambers, ignoring her protests that she could walk, holding her like she was something precious and breakable. The baby, she whispered. Is the baby safe? His voice was rough with emotion. You're both safe. He set her on his bed with infinite gentleness, then knelt beside her, pressing his forehead to the swell of her belly. Vera's breath caught. His eyes were closed, his expression raw with reverence, and she felt the mate bond pulse between them like a second heartbeat. I thought I lost you. The words came out broken. When Garrett came to tell me about the assassins, when I realized you were alone in the gardens. But you didn't lose me. She touched his face, tilting his chin up until their eyes met. I'm here. I'm staying. Something shifted in his gaze, the fear bleeding away, replaced by something deeper. Something that made her wolf rise up with answering intensity. Vera. His voice was a rasp. May I claim you? She knew what he was asking. The marking, the bond made permanent and unbreakable. She thought of Tomas, gentle Tomas who had died without knowing about their child, and felt peace settle where guilt had lived for so long. He would want her to be happy. He would want her to be safe. Yes, she whispered. Marcus rose, helping her to her feet, turning her so her back pressed against his chest. His hand settled on her hips, steadying her, and his breath was warm against her neck. I've waited 32 years for you, he said softly. For this moment. I need you to understand. Once I mark you, there's no going back. You'll be mine, Luna Queen, bound to me for the rest of our lives. And you'll be mine. She reached back, threading her fingers through his hair. Bound to me. That's how this works, isn't it? His laugh was low and rough. Yes, that's exactly how this works. He pressed his lips to her shoulder, kissing a path up to the curve of her neck. Vera shivered, heat pooling in her belly as the mate bond flared between them. She could feel his restraint, the iron control he was maintaining, and something in her thrilled at the knowledge that she could shatter it. Do it, she breathed. Claim me. His teeth sank into the junction of her neck and shoulder. Pain exploded through her, sharp and bright, and absolutely overwhelming. She cried out, her body arching against his, her wolf howling in something that might have been agony or ecstasy. But even as the pain crested, it began to transform. Spreading warmth chased the sharpness away, flooding her veins with liquid gold, reaching into every corner of her being. Through the bond, now blazing between them like a sun, she felt him. Not just his presence, but his essence, his fierce protectiveness, his bone-deep loneliness that was finally easing. His love. And it was love, she realized with wonder, already grown beyond anything she'd imagined possible. Mine, she felt through the bond, mine, finally mine. Now you, Marcus rasped, releasing his bite, his body trembling against hers. Mark me, make it complete. She turned in his arms, rising on her toes, pressing her lips to his throat. She could feel his pulse racing beneath her mouth. The most powerful alpha in the realm, laid bare and vulnerable for her. Her teeth found the same place on his shoulder that he'd claimed on hers. She bit down. His roar shook the chamber. His arms locked around her, crushing her against him as the bond ignited fully, a supernova of sensation that left her gasping. His blood was hot on her tongue, iron and power and mate, and she felt herself pour into him just as he had poured into her. Mine, she whispered against his skin. Yours. His voice broke on the word. Mate. They stood tangled together as the bond settled. It was like coming home after a lifetime of wandering, like warmth after endless winter, like safety after years of fear. Vera pressed her face to his chest, feeling his heart pound against her cheek, feeling their wolves curl around each other in perfect contentment. Mine, he said again, softer now. His hand found her belly, cradling the child that slept within. Both of you, mine to protect, mine to cherish. Ours, Vera corrected gently. This child is ours now. If you want, I want. No hesitation, no reservation. Your child is my child. From this moment forward, by blood and bond and law, they are heir to the Ashford throne. Tears slipped down her cheeks. For the first time in months, they were tears of joy. The coronation took place 3 weeks later in the great hall where Nikolai had met his end. The bloodstains had been scrubbed away, the room filled with flowers and light. But Vera remembered. She would always remember. She stood beside Marcus as the crown settled onto her head. Silver and sapphires, lighter than she'd expected, but heavy with meaning. Luna Queen, mate of the Alpha King. The words echoed through the hall as hundreds of wolves bent their heads in acknowledgement. Her father had died 2 days after Nikolai's execution, his heart finally giving out. But before the end, a letter had arrived. Shaky handwriting, tear-stained paper, the words of a man who had learned the truth too late. Forgive me, he had written. I believe the wrong child. I love you, Vera. I always loved you. It wasn't enough, but it was something. Garrett stood at the edge of the hall, his stone-carved face softened by something that might have been pride. Corvin, the reformed assassin, had pledged his service to her directly, the first of what Marcus privately called her truth guard. And Thomas's parents had journeyed from the borderlands to pay their respects to the daughter-in-law they'd never known. When they'd seen her belly, rounded now with 6 months of pregnancy, they had wept with joy. He would have been so happy, Thomas's mother had said, pressing a kiss to Vera's cheek. He loved you so much. I loved him too, Vera had answered honestly. I'll tell our child about him. They'll know who their father was. Marcus had stood beside her through that conversation, his hand warm on her back, no jealousy in his heart. He understood that love wasn't finite, that her history with Tomas didn't diminish what she felt for him. Now, as the coronation feast swirled around them, Marcus pulled her close on the dais, his hand resting on her belly as it had so often since the marking. Happy? He murmured against her hair. Vera leaned into his warmth, feeling the bond hum with contentment between them. Outside, the moon rose silver over Ashford territory. Her territory now. Her pack. Her home. Yes, she whispered. I'm home. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, it was the truth.